All right. So right here in the middle, we have Mr. Adam Sommers, who is the host of the Heartland Podcast. He founded it, created it. He started this podcast in hopes of bringing attention to the issues facing folks, not just in the biggest of cities, but across the Heartland. Mr. Sommers is an alumnus right here from UCM, in which he earned a Bachelor of Science in political science. He then went on to earn his jurisprudence doctorate from the University of Missouri Law School. And Mr. Sommers is an attorney right here in Warrensburg at the law office of Harris, and Sommers. Right here on the far right, we have Mrs. Jessica Piper. She was born in Metairie, Louisiana. Metairie, Louisiana, almost got it. So, at which she eventually landed in Arkansas, where she finished high school. She earned her Bachelor of Arts in Teaching from the University of Arkansas at Fort Smith, and her Master's of Arts in Teaching at University of Arkansas, Monticello. She's an American literature teacher with 16 years of experience. In 2022, she ran as a Democrat for election of the Missouri House of Representatives for District 1. Right here, then on my left, well, my right, sorry. I don't know. We have Mr. Raymond Reed, who was born in St. Louis, Missouri. He is also an alumnus from here at the University of Central Missouri, where he earned his bachelor's degree in 2018. Mr. Reed's experience includes working as a party affairs organizer with the Missouri Democratic Party. In 2022, Mr. Reed ran for the U.S. House of Representatives to represent Missouri's 2nd Congressional District. Mr. Reed is currently running for a state legislative seat in the Missouri House of Representatives to represent the 83rd District. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start the show. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks everybody for coming, and Jess and Ray. So I am Adam Sommer, the host of the Heartland Pod, and this is a live podcast. So we're on YouTube right now. Hello, people, and we're gonna have a good time. Ray and Jess have both been a long time friends of the podcast since we started it, and met them both through that process. And Jess now hosts her own show, the Dirt Road Democrat, that we produce, and that's every Thursday. And one day, I'm sure Ray will do his own wonderful show. That's for something else. So the topic is money in politics, and I'm going to set it up a little bit, and then I'm going to throw questions to the guests like I would do on a regular show. So I'm going to start with this. Money in politics, right? So the 2016 election cycle sets a record for general election spending, $6.5 billion in total spending. That's presidential and congressional combined, $6.5 billion. That's up from $6.2 billion in 2012, $5.3 billion in 2008. Any guess from anybody how much we spent in 2020? Anybody got a guess? $14.4 billion in 2020, right? So more than double the record in 2016. The growth prior to the 2012, 2016, and then the jump into 2020. The growth was usually pretty small. It tracked population growth, it tracked inflation metrics, but from 2008 to 2012, it goes up $1 billion. In 2016, from 2020, it goes up that massive amount. It's drastic, right? So we go from growth like this to growth like this, or if you're looking at it as a linear measure, we're talking about growth that's going like this to growth that grows like this, right? We're talking about a drastic change. So if you want to dig in more into those numbers, opensecrets.org is a great place to get snapshots of numbers if you don't want to dig through FEC filings for federal or NEC from Missouri. Great place to do that. So how did we get here? How did we get from $5.3 billion in 2008? And 12 years later, we wind up with $14.4 billion, a 300% increase in spending in that time frame. 2010, of course, the Supreme Court decides the landmark case, Citizens United versus the FEC, basically changing the rules on what used to be called soft money, relaxed those rules and said that money equals speech, and therefore we're not going to regulate certain types of political donations. And then the dissent in that opinion, Justice Stevens, had a quote that I wanted to pull out because I think it really sets up this discussion. So Justice Stevens said, In creating a new constitutional right for corporations to spend unlimited amounts of their shareholders' money to determine the outcome in candidate elections, the court has unleashed into our elections tremendous sums of money from for-profit corporations that cannot possibly be matched in quantity by contributions from ordinary citizens. The only possible outcome of this is that big money and special interests will have an even tighter grip on our democracy. Here in Missouri, major money flows. If you pay attention to Missouri politics, you've certainly heard the name Rex Stephenfeld, a billionaire donor who backs candidates and issues on the right. And so my first question on this, I'm going to go to Ray first. Ray, in your 2022 primary, how important was money? Where did it rank on the priority list of what you have to do to run in a congressional race?
Yeah. So initially we looked at the field that we were running in. I was running against a state representative who had instant name ID in the district, and this millionaire who just happened to be dropped in the district, who like jumped in the race with who jumped in the race with $1 million, even though, wasn't born in Missouri, grew up a different state away with Republicans, but whatever he's in the race. So we didn't rank money actually, or fundraising high early on, which is actually maybe a mistake. But we decided to, build a social media platform, and we thought that was our avenue. I think a lot of campaigns look at traditional media to get their message out. Maybe get an article in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch or an op-ed somewhere. But after someone reads that, I think people are just, not really going to care after that first time they read it. They're not going to think about it. They're not going to share that with them months later. So we decided to go for a more social media approach. I feel like other campaigns definitely caught on with this, that content is key going forward in the way we handle elections now.
Do you think that's something that, because you are a Gen Z candidate, you were one of the first congressional Gen Z candidates in American history, do you think that that's part of that differentiation is a generational approach?
Yeah, I definitely think that's 100%. The way that, everyone consumes their media now, Gen Z just understands how social media works.
So we sat in generational, right? I didn't really mean to do that, but it works for this discussion.
I'm the old one.
So speaking of social media, because Jess, you are not a Gen Z member, but you are. I would bet most of the people in this room know you are from social media. That's how you and I met in the first place, right? So you're known for Twitter. You're very much known for TikTok, and you were able to do something in your race in 2022 that was essentially unheard of with your fundraising numbers. And so how do you, sort of piggybacking off what Ray's talking about with the content is key, you kind of speak to how you did that and talk about the numbers you were able to do in a state house race as a Democrat in the northwest corner of the state of Missouri.
I'm definitely the northeast. Well, I called the Democratic Party and I was like, hey, I want to run. And they were like, well, we've never heard of you. You should run for dog catcher, not state rep. And so I was like, well, I think I'm going to do state rep. And then the first thing they said is, Rolodex yourself. Call your friends and neighbors and family and ask them for money. And it's like, I don't know any people with money. That's not going to work for me. So just like Ray, I was like, I'm going to have to create a new playbook because this isn't going to work at all. And I already had a little bit of a following on Twitter. And so I announced and I ended up getting $10,000 within the first 24 hours. And I was like, wow, that's good because most people, that's what they raise the whole time. So it just kept going, and the money kept coming in. There may be people in here who sent me a few bucks or did other things for me in my campaign. So I wish that money wasn't what it is. I wish I didn't need money. I wish they said, hey, raise $5,000, both of you, and that's all you got. And then you're gonna have to get out there and work your tail off. You're gonna have to knock doors. You're gonna have to talk to people. You're gonna have to do the real work. But that's not how it works. So it works with money, and it's gross and nasty to say that. And I was able to raise more than any House candidate in the entire state without even really asking for money, because I don't like that. My parents didn't raise me, like if I would have asked them for money, they would have said, well, mop the floor or something. I mean, I don't know what you want. Am I just gonna give you money? So it's hard for me to do that, but it worked out.
what do you see, and this will be for both of you, start with Jess, but the problem with the emphasis on money, I would think that one of the biggest problems that you run into is what you're talking about, which is you want to talk to folks, you want to engage with folks, you want to meet with them, and there's got to be some level of almost, kind of like you're showing up at their door with a bag of dirt and a vacuum, right?
My grandpa used to sell vacuums.
I
was made for this.
My uncle sold what were those called?
Rainbow?
Yeah, rainbows, yeah.
Those were awesome. Gen X, good job. All right. So anyway, what was the question again?
Sort of the impetus of money in the relationship, that, you're trying to engage with voters, but the reality is that engagement is tied to the money.
Yeah, and you'll hear a lot of candidates that are spending 7-8 hours a day calling donors. And that's just not my jam. I could not do it. My campaign manager made me call 4 people, and I was nearly in tears having to do that because it's just an awful thing. And you're seeking out people, who are really wealthy, and the whole thing just feels gross. And that keeps you from doing the work. Where I was able to get online and, create a video or put out a tweet, and people would respond and send me money, and then I could knock the doors, and I could afford to pay for other people to knock the doors, so.
What about you, Ray? You were covering a bigger, you're in a congressional district, they shifted the lines on you, a pretty big district. Did you find that to be a similar issue on your end?
Yeah, with the emphasis on money, spoiler alert, I'm a Democrat. The Democratic Party seriously needs to prioritize bringing in younger people and elevate them into leadership positions and getting them to run for office from local all the way to federal office. And the way we do that is by making money less important. So, I think the problem with money being such an importance in politics is it discourages a lot of young people, because a couple years out of college, you don't have $100,000 to hire campaigns to advocate, get all the things you need to run the congressional race. So yeah, it's a serious burden on bringing younger people in. Luckily, there are great groups like Grassroots Analytics that we use to fundraise, and the media is really great at fundraising. But yeah, money, the emphasis of money in politics is definitely hard on getting young people involved.
Yeah, and the real trick is even 10 years after college, you're not going to have $100,000 that year. So to break that news, but even so, right? The rules are the rules, right? They're the same rules for both parties. The Republicans have the same rules that the Democrats have when it comes to money. And to me, it feels like, as somebody who tries to, obviously I have my favorites, but as somebody who tries to observe and comment, right? It feels like when it comes to using those rules, the Democrats have decided to add their own sort of levels of morality and levels of judgment as to what is okay to do from a money standpoint, whereas the Republicans are willing to go and say, those are the rules, open the gate, right? And do you feel that trying to build something?
Yeah, for one, I couldn't take, or I wouldn't take oil money, I wouldn't take NRA money, I wouldn't take Wall Street money. I really had to do a lot of grassroots fundraising, because that's just what, first of all, that's what's right.
Yeah.
And that's what, your Democratic electorate really expects out of you. And a lot of Democrats, not many of us are trust fund babies, so we don't really have, daddy's money to go find, unless you're.
So yeah, there's,
Yeah.
What do you guys feel like? It's one of the things that I think is such a hindrance right now for folks who are running on the left, is just an unwillingness to engage. The oil money, I think, is a great example, right? I won't take corporate PAC money and I won't take oil money. It's like one of the first things you hear from somebody who's running as a Democrat, whether it's Senate or Congress, whatever it is. It's like in their announcement, right? It's like, I'm running and I'm not going to take any money. Okay, well, good luck. Good luck with running. Do you feel like it's almost caving in and saying that if I take this money, I'm too weak to just make my own decision? Couldn't you take the money and still be Jess Piper? Just because I give you money for your campaign doesn't mean if I call you, you're going to do whatever I want.
I won't.
I'm sure you will.
But some people might. I know I've said this over and over again. I wasn't beholden to anybody. there were people who sent me $10, $15, and they knew that they wanted to help me buy a flyer. They weren't trying to buy, my vote on something because I would assume, are just trusting what we're doing. But the funniest thing was, I raised plenty of money, and so I'm the poster child for money can't buy a
Right.
race, not in Northwest Missouri. But I tell you, Jesus Christ couldn't have won that race, so that's as long as he ran as a Democrat. But anyway, the biggest problem is what happened is Republicans, there were 5 that were running in the primary because it was an open seat and I was the only Democrat. And bye guys. Those 5 Republicans were super upset with the Republican who won because he ended up taking a whole bunch of money from a really wealthy corporation. And they were like, oh my God, clutching their pearls. And I was like, y'all are Republicans, like this is your game, this is your due, this is what you do, right? So they were all really amazed that it could happen to them. But like I said, I mean, if we could get money out of it, it would be fantastic. But we are so red in some parts of Missouri that no amount of money is going to be able to push you over the edge.
Yeah, I mean, you think we can, it feels like we're trying to, it's like Ukraine and Russia, right? It's like, they've got all the weapons, why don't you want the weapons? I mean, do you see it like that it's that big of a problem, or, are you gonna swear off all other money forever?
I think Democrats were not assholes, I'm not gonna put,
Local Heartland Pod.
I'm not gonna put, $10,000 in PAC money or how much, over the lives of, the kid or 19 kids got gunned down in the classroom. Right. They're just principles, and because of who we are, there's just certain thresholds, and there's just lines we won't cross. Yeah.
So what about money from like 501c groups, right? We've got 501c4s and 5s and 6s, and there's slight distinction between those things. For example, the NRA is a 501c4 group. There are lots of 501c4 groups. There are left-leaning 501c4 groups. I think the one that the current candidate for Attorney General on the Democratic side, Mr. Gross, he runs a 501c4. So, it's not just a right-wing thing. How do you feel about those? And then, compare and contrast, right? We've got the NRA as a 501c4, but then we also have the AFL-CIO, right, as a 501c5, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, 501c5. So they have different rules on reporting, but, are you willing to make those distinctions? Or is it just dark money is dark money?
No, I think that you have to look at what the organization is promoting. So AFL-CIO is definitely, supporting unions and solidarity and wages and, better conditions, better environments for workers. And then the NRA is promoting guns everywhere. So I would definitely just look at the background and be like, yeah, AFL-CIO is cool with me. NRA is not that the NRA would give me $1. But.
I don't know. I mean, the Door brothers don't like you very much.
There's a lot of people that don't like me very much. I don't know who the Door brothers are.
The No Compromise guys. There's the No Compromise guys that sit in the
Missouri
NRA.
Firearms
Yeah,
Coalition.
they say that the NRA is a left-wing organization. That's true. That's a quote.
That's nice.
That's a quote. What about you? I mean, is it distinction-based, or is it just dark money is dark money regardless of the source?
I think it's up to the candidates to, kind of break down to their election, what they're taking money for. If they are choosing to take money, like in my case, Voters of Tomorrow and March for Our Lives, which recently set up, PACs to be active this next election.
Right.
And I intend, if they do decide to work with us, to take a check from them, because I just believe that, it's important to get young people involved in politics, and it's important to protect kids in schools from guns.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit because of that and because of the news that's happening right now. And I didn't put this on our prep sheet, but I think you guys will be fine. Talking about March for Our Lives, right? And you have some connections there. There's a heavy Gen Z connection going on there. You speak to a little bit, seeing what came out of Wisconsin this week, and the numbers are coming out now. And what we're seeing is that Gen Z, your generation of half the people that are in this room right now, turned out in, record numbers.
Yeah, we did.
How does that feel in context of the money? Because it doesn't look like it was a money thing to me.
Yeah, that's kind of what's keeping me going, because, this generation, I've said it a million times, I believe we're the most compassionate generation, the most caring generation. We are what those prior generations have worked so hard. We are the change they worked so hard for, and it's, it would be a big disservice for us to fail to meet this moment and not turn out to vote. I think kids all across the country are realizing that. In addition, they're just being fed up with, mass shooting after mass shooting, Republicans fighting to take away reproductive rights, fighting to keep cutting taxes for large corporations. So yeah, I think this generation is just ready to lead, and we're doing it at the ballot box, and eventually we'll be doing it on the ballot.
Yeah, I mean, here in Missouri, we're passing another record tax code. We just passed one of those last year. We're going to pass one this year. So, you're Gen X, Millennial, Gen Z,
I raised him.
right?
I raised a bunch of them.
I've talked about this some, and I don't know if you and I have talked about this, but I know I've talked about it with Rachel, the other co-host of the pod, who's also a Gen Xer, that it feels like to me, and this is a little bit off the field of money, but connected to the fundraising thing, but it feels like to me that the Gen X core has sort of found this position now where I kind of agree with what Ray is saying, that there's almost like a bridge. Like there was a river that we had to cross, and you were trying to cross it as a group, and it turned out it was easier to build a bridge for the next group that could reinforce that bridge for the next group. Is that way off base? Does that feel?
No, I mean, we know, I was just looking at some studies saying that white women, white Gen X women, are responsible for a lot of nasty things, the way we vote. And so I can say that my generation, and I taught, juniors for a really long time. My generation failed Ray. They failed these kids. We've left them with a full plate of climate change and racism and systemic issues all the way through the United States. But now I can see them coming, and it just makes me want to cry my eyes out. I can see them coming. I see what they are doing. They are fed up with all the stuff that they've been handed, right? It shouldn't be on them to fight the things. It should have been on us. It should have been on our parents, but we didn't do it. We didn't address it, and now our kids are doing it for us. And so I've raised 5 kids, and pretty liberal kids who are growing up knowing, like I have one who's like, I absolutely will not bring children into this world. I have another who had children. But the whole point of it is that where I failed, where my generation failed, I can see that a lot of us did a better job with our children and raised children who were empathetic and looked around the world and thought, this doesn't have to be this way, and I'm going to fix it if I can do it.
Yeah. So I think we're kind of, I was looking at about a half an hour, if that is about right. So I thought maybe we could open it up and take some live fire. If anybody's got some questions, we're all pretty, we can, I don't think any of us can dance, but I think we can dance maybe a question if we need to, so. Yeah.
I just had a question for you, Ms. Piper. So I've only been in Missouri for over 3 years now. I came from Phoenix, which is a pretty democratic city. Coming here, I was kind of felt like I was in kind of a no man's land, I guess. But you going into the race that you ran for, and what you stated earlier, that no amount of money will ever put you over the top in some of these red districts. So I was just kind of wondering what your mindset was going into this race. Even did you think that, what were you trying to achieve with running? Did you think that you were going to win, or?
I knew that it was going to be difficult, but I was a teacher for a very long time, and I looked around and saw what was going on. And then I went to vote in 2020, and there was no one to vote for. So I was like, if nobody else can do it, it's going to be me. But I did set expectations high, and I believe that if you work really hard, you can get ahead. And that's not necessarily true in politics, right? It's really not. But what I was able to do is get 100% more than the person who didn't run in 2020, right? And I got 4 points more than the person who ran in 2018. So we have to, as Democrats, look at this as a long game and stop playing this knee-jerk reaction thing, right? Where we throw somebody in a seat and say, vote for them, they don't win, they go away. There's no infrastructure to keep people going. And so I knew that I wanted to make change, and I knew that if I said it loud enough, that my neighbors would hear me, and they'd say, you know what, I think you're right. So I was able to flip about 400 people, and now I think about those 400 people all the time, because if there's not a candidate this time, what happens to those 400 people? They grow apathetic, they stop voting, they're done for a while. And so my point was to win. It didn't happen, but I've had to navigate this instead. I don't know.
Well, and look at where we are right now, right? You had already built a huge following, but the fact that you ran turned it into a different story, right? You went from an outspoken social media personality that people knew to a person who was going to run. Have you counted the number of stories about you that have been published yet? I lost count. There's several of them. And now you're doing the show, right? There's all of these things that sort of blossom out of this thing that happens. And just like Jess is saying, the infrastructure thing is so huge. It's part of why the Heartland Pod exists in the first place, right? We looked around in 2020, and we were looking at doing a 501c4, and then COVID happened, and so we were like, it's gonna be pretty hard to do that now. And so we pivoted, right? So we went media because we knew that we could do that. We knew that we had the equipment to do that. And when you look around at the market, you go, well, heck, get in your car, turn on the FM radio dial, and try to find anybody on talk radio that isn't some nationally syndicated, hardcore conservative, right? I'm not talking about general news talk. I'm talking about all the way as far as you can go on the dial to the right. And if they're not a nationally syndicated version of that, it's somebody locally who's trying to be a nationally syndicated version of that. So there was just nothing out there. And so you got to fill the vacuum. But when you're doing it, when we started doing it, we started with 28 Twitter followers, right? There was nobody. We had less downloads our first month than we have a day now, right? It's crazy, but that took time to build. It took building relationships with people like Ray, building relationships with people like Jess, and gaining trust of other people, because when you just show up and say, hey, we're media and we'd like to talk to you, right? It throws people off a little bit from an infrastructure standpoint. On that infrastructure thing, you're running in an area where it's a lot different, right? You're about to run for a seat that's already been held by a Democrat, is highly likely that you would win that race, right?
It's way to work hard. We gotta put the work.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm liking this opportunity.
Yeah.
You don't have to be Jesus Christ.
I know.
That's good.
But if I'm just Piper, I wouldn't buy plans.
There you go. Other questions? Yeah.
I was wondering about, because everybody talks about the future and stuff, and how I'm just worried about all these people that are working their butts off and everything, because they keep on talking about cutting Social Security or cutting blind pension or cutting, disability and stuff. Is there going to be a way that people are going to be able to make money or to live or to be sustainable in the future?
That's an excellent question. You guys will find out with me on that, because so I have a daughter who just turned 6 years old. Her name is Clara, and she is in a wheelchair, and she has a severe neurological disorder, and she will always need assistance 100% of the time for the rest of her life. She can't eat on her own. She can't talk. She can't do anything except for watch her favorite stuff, and she loves to do that and laugh at her sister and roll her eyes at her brother. But she's always going to need that help, and so that's an issue that is on my plate personally as well, and I totally understand where the question comes from. I don't know is the answer. The way things are trending right now, we're going to have a course correction. I think we're due for a course correction, and I think the cyclical nature of politics will hopefully do that. And I do think that a lot of the threatened cuts are saber rattling, and I think that if they try to do that stuff, people are going to hear from people like you and people like me and my wife and other parents and other, people with whatever disability it is are going to come forward and speak. And I think we live in a society now where that's luckily much easier to do than it used to be. Folks ask, how come I never heard of this disease before when we talk about my daughter? And A, it wasn't discovered until fairly recently, and wasn't understood until fairly recently, but B, it's because there was a time in this country, we're not talking about, Nazi Germany, I'm talking about the United States of America, where somebody who needed assistance would just simply be put somewhere where there were people to assist them, but nobody to see them. And that's the way it used to be. And I think there are people who want to put it back that way. I think there genuinely are people who are interested in doing that. And I know that the three of us sitting up here will fight very hard to avoid that in all terms. And that's part of why the money in politics thing is so important, because the reason that those pushes are coming is the money. It's the money that they're after. Because if somebody who needs assistance is allowed to be part of society and vote and make decisions and be part of the decision-making process, then the people whose number one goal is money and power are always going to have a tough time, because their goals and your goals or my goals for my daughter are different. Is there anything else to?
Yeah, I just like add on that, when you're scared about things like that, just talk to people, everyone that you know, about why it's so important to vote.
Yes.
And vote for and do their own research on the candidate who's going to fight for Social Security, fight for healthcare, fight for reproductive rights, fight for the interests that matter most to you. And when we all talk to everyone on networks like that, good people get elected, and it creates incentive for future politicians to do less shitty. So.
Yeah. Telling your story is super important. That's it. It's very important. It's a great question.
I'm sorry, I said a bad word.
It isn't anything to this podcast normally. We're just not normally in public. Any other questions?
Don't be shy.
Nothing at all. I'm always impressed when there's no questions. Yeah.
So as future politicians, the people who are wanting to take an active role in making decisions, how do you convince people not to vote against their self-interest?
I'll say, first of all, I think we all need to learn new phrases. And I think that the phrase voting against your self-interest is a bad phrase. I think it's a polarizing phrase. I think it is on the same list for me as blue dot red state. I think that's a pretty stupid phrase, because it is an isolationist phrase and it tells people to feel alone because they are alone. And so I think when you start thinking of it in those terms, you're never gonna, when I'm dealing with my clients, right, I can't say to them, you're an idiot, right? And that's what telling somebody you're voting against your own interests is. That's what it is. It's like saying to them, I don't think that you're smart enough to make your own decisions. And nobody agrees with that, right? Nobody does.
But this is why it happens, because it happens all the time. I know, I see it. So like I got 25% of the vote, but 50% of my district voted for weed. And you're like, dude, guys,
Right.
But and this is why.
People like you were in the legislature, we wouldn't have to vote on it in the first place.
But here's why, because when they have to research ballot initiatives, there's no R or D behind it.
Right.
So they have to read it and figure it out for themselves. And when they read progressive policies, they're like, dang, that's gonna work out good for me. I think I'm gonna vote for this. So they are progressive leaning. We voted down right to work. We voted to expand Medicaid. We voted for weed twice, 2 different kinds, So we are people who understand progressive values. It's just that folks where I am are in a loop of really bad misinformation. When someone says, I'm gonna watch the news, they literally need Fox. And so it's not that, because that's the news to them, right? Our papers come out once a week. So like my neighbors didn't figure out about the library thing until this week, on Thursday. They don't know because they're not on Twitter, they're not on Facebook, and they're not following it. They didn't know that our town library is likely to have to go to part-time and that we're gonna lose librarians, right? And we have to be very specific. This is Republican policy. This is Republican dominance. This is 20 years, 2 decades of Republicans being in charge of Missouri. So we have to say it out loud and know that our friends and neighbors are working 1 job or 2 jobs and taking care of kids, and they absolutely don't have time to research all the stuff that I'm privileged to do because I stay home and work from home. So I spend that time, and then and that's why you guys see me online so much. I'm shooting that stuff out. this is the bill, this is the person responsible, tell everyone you know. And that will keep folks from just doing a knee jerk, man, this looks really good. And then I always vote for a Republican. I always do. Whenever you say, this is what they're doing to our state friends, then it's, more powerful.
As somebody who's in the current youngest generation of politics, how do you address that?
Yeah, a lot of folks in my generation, there's a lot of apathy towards, parties,
Political parties.
yeah, political parties. Because, the UCM College Democrats is the best part. But yeah, there's a lot of apathy towards, just getting really engaged in politics. And what I try to say is, when you have an issue that you're passionate about, that is going to follow you the rest of your life, talk to, find out who your state representative is, find out who your congressperson is, contact their office, and if they don't give you the answer you like, keep pressing them.
Yeah.
And if they don't, give you a satisfactory answer, find those running against them in the future that you do agree with and support them and stay involved. But yeah, it's not easy. That's the thing. Politics isn't easy, no matter where you're in and where you're in it at. So just staying in the fight, kind of staying pragmatic a little bit.
I like that word. Pragmatic. It's a good word.
But just staying in the fight, because there's a million problems in the state of Missouri and the country, and they're not going to be fixed overnight. So the thing is just stay in the fight.
Said right here on the Heartland Pod by Ray Reed, politics ain't easy. There you go. Print the shirt. All right, well, if there's no other questions.
Unless you don't want me to ask.
No, please.
All right, so, I'm a political scientist, and I know some of you study politics. So I just kind of wanted to get your perspectives, particularly on Missouri side. What makes Missouri qualitatively different than, say, a state like Florida's going, or a state like Tennessee is going? We're seeing what's happening just.
Right, as we're talking,
As we're talking,
expulsion
they're being expelled. What makes Missouri different, or do you see Missouri basically kind of being honed in, or a cookie cutter situation of what's going on in every state? I know that's kind of that's a little bit double barrel in a way, only because we're seeing layers of the same thing in each state. What makes Missouri different?
Talk to David Pepper yet? Is that coming up?
Coming up tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'll be a good conversation.
Right.
You'll be right on.
So talking about the state legislators.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 40% of our seats last year weren't even contested.
Yeah.
We give away our state government. That is 2 yeah.
40 what?
49.
49.
49%.
Holy, well, there you go. I am not a political scientist.
We're not gonna get you back on the show again.
So, but we're giving away our state government, and people are like, why is this happening? Why do people vote against their self-interest? 2.5 million Missourians didn't have a choice, right? So you got people down in the boot hill who are, progressive when you speak to them, but think that they're a Republican because they haven't seen anyone on the ballot other than a Republican for a decade or two, right? So people start getting confused about, what they actually are doing. But Missouri is the same as these states because we have the same laws coming in. I'll talk to people from Iowa or Ohio or Florida or wherever, and they're like, oh my God, they're doing the same thing here. And I'm like, oh my God, because they're not writing the bills, right? And you know this because whenever they interview these bills, the sponsors of these bills, they can't describe them. They can barely read them. They're fumbling over the words in their own bills because they're not their own. And Missouri, I think, is moving right along with these red states in that they see what's coming. And so the very next thing that's coming up is voting rights and, petitions, initiative petitions, because they know what's coming and they know they can't run on their policies because they're failed. And that's why you never see a Missouri Republican saying anything about Missouri, they have to look out and say, well, Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, well, hello, what about Eric Burleson? All right, let's come back home.
Right.
And there's one other thing I want to mention, then I'll shut my mouth, but if we don't take care of extremism here, it bleeds into the entire country. The person who nullified Missouri gun laws, the federal gun laws, that's now just being taken up in the courts, he was promoted to congressman. That was his first thing, was to try to nullify federal gun laws. And now he's going after DEI. So what we don't stop, this extremism goes out and impacts every single person in the United States.
Yeah, Missouri is so unique, you know, in more ways than one. The history of Missouri is also the history of race relations in America.
Yeah.
And I think Missouri is, you know, the most beautiful state in the union, and it's definitely worth fighting for, and I love every inch of the state. And I know I'm not alone, as far as Democrats who believe that, whether they're in politics or just, you know, an average Joe who's just going to work and voting. But yeah, there's just so many layers to how Missouri is now. I think Missouri is a place where we're not completely out of the fight. And we see that with things like Jess mentioned earlier, you know, so many folks in our district voted for Wheat, but didn't vote for her. There are people here who believe in democratic values, but we often vote for sometimes personality on a statewide level, like Eric Greitens should have never been a candidate even in 2016, but he was somehow elected governor. Eric Schmidt shouldn't be where he is today. He's a horrible human being. I just fundamentally believe that. But yeah, I think it's just Missouri Democrats weathering the storm, putting forward good candidates like Jess. Like Jess is gonna be, and hopefully, like the most important Democrat of the 2020s to me. But yeah, I think it's just about staying in the fight. Missouri is not completely out of the question for Democrats. I think it just takes, you know, good-hearted people who still believe Missouri worth fighting for.
I think that's true, that Missouri's not quite there. I don't think it would be that hard for it to wind up there. And there's a reason why when we started doing the show, you know, we kind of kicked around, Sean and I, who originally started it, is this a Missouri show or is it a regional show? And, you know, when you look at Missouri, Iowa, Tennessee, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Wisconsin, and then really kind of go Indiana, Ohio, right? If you kind of just look at those states here in the heartland, so to speak, the similarities are huge. I interviewed, just about to interview, and I had previously interviewed David Pepper, author of Laboratories of Autocracy. He is from Ohio and was I want to say he was
State party chair.
State party chair. He was a candidate for maybe Secretary of State at some point. He's like the Jason Kander of Ohio, right? Everybody knows who he is in Ohio. He's got books that people buy, and he has been just talking about this nonstop. And he and I did about 40 minutes on an episode. It's back in August, I think. All of our episodes are free. You can get them anytime you want. Heartlandpod.com, check it out. And he and I, it was like the Spider-Man meme, right? It was just two people pointing at each other, being like, "Me too, us too. Also, it's the same," but like with tears. And so that's I do think it's here. I think the biggest difference is that Missouri's population was already declining, as opposed to like Florida and Ohio. Like those are states that are still growing pretty well, right? But if you look at, say, Missouri, so Sean, one of the other hosts and the guy who co-founded with me, he lives in Colorado. And so that's a really fun juxtaposition and comparison, is the Missouri-Colorado thing, where their population is continuing to grow, right? Policy-wise, they're more progressive. Other than Lauren Boebert, they have mostly sane, rational human beings in their government offices. And, you know, I think they just legalized or are legalizing mushrooms, psilocybin over there. right? And so like, it's crazy, right? So they're at like 6.1 million and Missouri's like right at 6. And like, so we're just sort of, you know, like the scale is slightly tipping. So I think that's an interesting case study, but yeah, I think we're basically there. I think the ALEC bills have been bad. Project Blitz, we've talked about it a lot on our shows. Project Blitz has worked. It has distracted us from important things with nonsensical things. But the biggest problem, and the reason I think that Ray is right that Missouri still has hope is that last session, we saw a lot of these bills that are getting passed other places, not getting passed in the state of Missouri. They weren't quite able to do it. Governor Parson has, as much criticism as we have levied on him from our shows, we refer to him disaffectionately as the goldfish governor. But he has said no to some things. And the party itself, the Republican Party can't get itself together enough to override his vetoes on these things. Which is why Jay Ashcroft is running for governor and why he said he agrees with Jess and Ray and I that Republicans have failed the state of Missouri for the last 20 years. But the reason he thinks they failed is that they have failed to pass those extreme pieces of legislation. And that's his entire bid right now. He came out attacking his own party for being a failure at not being conservative enough.
Which is nice for
which is
him
great.
to be transparent.
Right, yeah, no,
Say the quiet stuff out loud.
That's
I'm there
exactly
for
right,
it.
that's exactly right. So, but that's an excellent
I
point.
think, just like leave it on a hopeful note, I think it was 2004, statewide Missouri Republican Party Chair Aunt Wagner, after a really good election night, said, Missouri is solid red, we're done, there's no more Democrats. And 2 years later, Claire McCaskill came, swept the state blue.
Yeah.
2 years after that, Jay Nixon, Jason Kander, we won almost every statewide seat in 2008. In 2012, won again. You know, things can change in Missouri, they can change fast. It just takes people to stay hopeful.
I agree, go Cardinals.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks for having us, this was a ton of fun. Thanks for Dr. Coleman for arranging this, and thanks to you all for coming, and yeah, tell your friends, check out the Heartland Pod, check out the Red Democrat, and yeah, thanks to Ray for making the trip out.
I love you, see ya.
Hey, Internet. What's up, people?